כן משכתיך חסד ואהבת עולם אהבתיך על כן משכתיך חסד ההרים ימושו והגבעות תמותנה וחסדי מאיתך לא ימות ההרים ימושו והגבעות תמותנה וחסדי מאיתך לא ימות an everlasting love I have loved you for this I have drawn you with my love an everlasting love I have loved you for this I have drawn you with my love the mountains will crumble and the hillsides will fade away but my love for you will not end the mountains will crumble and the hillsides will fade away but my love for you will not end
Hi, everyone. So glad you're here and joining us tonight to spend some time reflecting, meditating, discussing, learning about the role of compassion, chesed or rachamim, in the process of teshuvah. So let's just take a moment to settle in and arrive. There are still some folks who are just coming in from the waiting room. So set aside any distractions, close browsers, set your phone away. Come into a comfortable seated or standing posture. If there's any place in your body right now where you're feeling tense or tight, just notice that. Bring a little breath to that part of the body. You might even think the word soft and let the muscles soften. Take a moment to focus your attention on your breath, your breathing this evening. You don't have to do anything or change anything. Just noticing how the breath is moving through the body right now where it's easy to expand, where the breath is full. The contraction of the exhale. Allowing the focus on the breath to bring you into this present moment. You've made the time to be here. You've set aside other activities. So come and be here. What I'd like to do this evening is to build off of Rabbi Mark Margolius's session last week, but if you were not there for his session, and the recording hasn't been made available yet. It will soon. I see that question in the chat. To build on his teaching, but also to bring a different perspective. We often talk about the striving for balance between din and rachamim, between judgment and compassion. And I want tonight to explore not so much the balance and how these two qualities of judging ourselves and having compassion for ourselves are in tension with each other, but actually how these can speak to one another. What is the role of compassion when judgment arises? And what is the role of judgment and compassion together in the process of teshuvah, in the process of taking steps to our best selves, to be the people we know we can be, we want to be. And I want to begin by looking at two texts that each express a different model of teshuvah, a different process. And I'm in just a moment, I'll put the link to the Google Doc in the chat, and I'll send people to do some reading and initial conversation in Chavruta. If we were in person, I would be asking you to turn to the person sitting next to you. So this way you will turn to the person sitting perhaps next to you, perhaps halfway across the country, perhaps halfway across the world. I see people here from a lot of different states. The texts are the first text is somewhat short. It comes from Maimonides, the Rambam. He has a very extensive discussion of teshuvah and what are all the steps and the process and what needs to take place in order for someone to arrive at that moment of teshuvah, full teshuvah, complete teshuvah. But we're just going to look at one passage, one excerpt. And one excerpt from Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, which is a text that may be familiar to you. It is, I think, one of the most beautiful texts about teshuvah. And we're going to focus on the section of his text that where he talks about the teshuvah of the self. Elsewhere in the text, he talks about forgiveness of another person and how one can enable another person to come to teshuvah, but he also speaks about the process of the self. And the Rambam and Rabbi Nachman present us with two pretty different models of Teshuvah. So I want to begin with the exploration of the question, what do these models mean to you? What do they speak to you? Which one resonates more? Where might one be more appropriate than another? And what are the strengths and perhaps limitations of each of these models? We'll come back together after reading these texts in small groups or chavruta for a little bit of discussion, and then move into another meditation and then another set of texts that I think can help us put these two models together. And again, think about the interaction between judgment and compassion, between din and rachamim. So you should be able to access this Google Doc. Yep, I see that people are already taking a look. And I'm gonna send you into a breakout room randomly. So this is an opportunity to perhaps meet someone you don't know. Take a moment to introduce yourself. You'll be either in a pair or a group of three. Where are you zooming in from tonight? What's your name? What's your connection to BJ? Where are you zooming in from tonight? And then you can dive into the reading of these texts, and the discussion questions are underneath the text, the questions that I just talked through. We'll take, I think, about 15, 20 minutes. So check in at that time and see how people are feeling if we need more time, but it'll be at least 15 minutes, so till 7:45 or so. And then we'll come back. So before I put anyone in breakout, before I open the breakout rooms, just want to ask if there are any clarifying questions. Yes, Barbara. Oh, Barbara, you're muted.
Okay, now I'm not, I think. I don't know how to pull up the attachments at the same time that I'm in the meeting.
Ah, okay. So let's see. You do need to kind of toggle back and forth between your web browser and Zoom. So when you open the document, you'll be in your web browser.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you click back to Zoom, you'll be in the Zoom.
So you want us to read this first and then we'll be going into groups?
I'm going to put everyone into a group, put folks into groups, and in your group, you'll read this. So it might mean that while you're reading it, you're not looking at everybody's faces, but then you'll toggle back to your Zoom and you will see everyone's faces for your conversation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Here we go. Okay, Deb and Matthew, I see you haven't. Did you get a pop-up on your screen to join a room? No, okay. So I'm gonna move you.
Okay, I need to join the group.
Great. Okay, Sheila, let's see where you are.
Okay.
Did you get a little notification? Yes, I think you did. Okay, Diane, did you get a notification?
Okay, let
And
me
Nancy?
unmute. Hi, Shuli.
Yes, I did, Shuli, but then to read the document, I have to come out of the Zoom. Unless I'm
Sure,
not
Shuli.
correct. Hi, Nancy.
Okay, you know what? Well,
Hi.
maybe what I'll do is keep this room for, and I'll share the screen here for anyone who's having trouble with the getting into the breakout group and seeing the text at the same time. So I'm not gonna participate in this, but I will put up
Okay,
the text.
okay.
And then you all can have, a little, not quite a chavruta, but whoops. Okay. Okay, and so the text is on the screen, but you also have the link to it. So if you go to your browser, you can open it. And I'll just put that link in the chat once more. Okay, I'll pop into all the rooms to help if anyone's having a hard time. So welcome back, everyone. I know the technology was not perfect, but I hope that you were able to have some connection with the text. And I'll put it up on the screen right now, just as we spend a few minutes reflecting on it as a group. Would love to hear some of the things that came up in your discussion. Which of these models resonates, and where are the possibilities within each one, and perhaps the limitations within each one? And since I have this screen up, I'm going to ask you to raise your Zoom hand. It'll be easier for me to see you and be able to call on you if you use your Zoom hand. Yeah, Tony. Just unmute, Tony.
Yeah, we were just talking about how at first these seemed very different from each other. And we said how we hated the first one and really liked the second. But the more we examined them and the more we thought about them, it seemed that they actually flowed into each other. And the last line of the first one, particularly, was kind of like an opening to the second one, because it was where the second one was all about, hey, there's good inside you. The first one was about, also in a way, especially with the last line, okay, so there is good inside you, confess it, find it, name it, and move on. And it was like sort of a bridge, like a window, a door. If you do the thing in that last line, then you have this bridge, and now you're moving into the second one where you can find those things inside you.
Beautiful.
We found them to be actually quite related to each other, more than separate, the more we discussed it, but not at first.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
Do you have something to add to that, what I just said?
Martin.
So we discussed, I think as a group we came down on that Nachman or Bretzlov is more accessible and more kind. And if you took the contrast between Din and Chesed, the Rambam sounds more like Din and Reb Nachman sounds a little more like Chesed. On the other hand, I personally appreciate the fact that Rambam sometimes lays out rational, understandable steps. The counter to that, of course, may be that after you've looked at these steps and feel daunted by them, you might get into this depression that Reb Nachman talked about because it looks so hard. So
Beautiful. So perhaps there's a complementary nature to these approaches. One leads into the other. One gives some structure to allow for the other. Any other comments? People could feel free also to put your comments in the chat if you prefer to do it that way. Okay. So I think you're right. Where'd you go, Tony? These texts do seem very different, or these two approaches seem very different at first. And I think will speak for myself that there are times where one has resonated more than the other, where there's been a need to really articulate, well, here's all the things that I've done wrong, that I've hurt people, the ways I've hurt myself. And there's some value to that. And other times where the real work is that self-compassion, that finding that one nikuda tova that Rabbi Nachman talks about. How could it be that I've never done one thing right, that I've never done one thing that has brought goodness or joy into the world, and to build on that. I think many of us live often not in the Rabbi Nachman space. That if we're honest about how we walk through the world, even if it's not at the moment or the time of year that we are engaging in Teshuvah, we would notice, if we paid attention, that we often fall into judging mind. A mindset where whatever we see in ourselves or in other people, there's judgment. It even happens in the practice of meditation. If you have some experience with that, you probably have had an experience of sitting and the mind wandering, and then all of a sudden you're judging that. Oh, I can't believe I'm lost in thought again. I'm such a bad meditator. This is a very common trope. So even in the effort to be kind, to be present, judgment arises. Judgment arises. We often talk about, in one of the definitions of mindfulness meditation from John Kabat-Zinn, is that mindfulness is paying attention to what is happening in the moment without judgment. So what we want to do, or what we're seemingly striving to do, is to be fully present without any judgment of what is happening, which is different from what the Rambam is saying, what Maimonides is saying. So I want to put these two ideas together in a slightly different way, Tony, than you did in your chavruta with Wendy. And I want to suggest that what Rabbi Nachman asks us to do in finding the nikuda tova is absolutely essential as a first step toward Teshuvah. So a little different from what you said, Tony, of the Rambam leading into the guidance from Rabbi Nachman, and starting with Rabbi Nachman's approach as the foundation. That so much of the time we're living in our head in judgment, that for most of us, a good place to start this time of year is actually in this place of self-compassion. So I want to invite us into a little bit of a practice right now. So you can resume a seated and upright posture, relaxed, not slouching, but not rigid. My teacher, Yael Shai, calls this a posture of dignity. You've come to my Wednesday morning meditation. You've heard me say this a lot. To sit, first of all, we sit in a posture of dignity. Our posture itself lets us experience a sense of self-worth. And I'll ask you to do right now what Rabbi Nachman asks of us to do in his text, which is to let your mind, your attention rest on a moment of goodness, whether that's a particular quality about yourself that you love and find pure, or perhaps it was a moment, an interaction with another person. Just one. In the past week, was there a moment of goodness where you expressed love, joy, gratitude, support? And when you've settled on that moment or that quality, ask yourself, where am I feeling this in my body? What is happening in the body right now as you think about this nikuda tova, this good, essential point, this goodness within you? Notice if you're feeling any sensation in a particular part of the body. Is there a smile coming to your lips as you consider this? Is there warmth? So imagining now this nikuda tova, this point, this quality, this goodness, resting inside your heart. As a shining light that is now beginning to expand. With a golden glow spreading over your chest, across your shoulders, down your arms and to your fingers. Picturing and imagining and maybe even feeling a sense of this light, this golden goodness spreading down to the lower body, over the hips and thighs, knees, down to the feet and toes. So the goodness drawing down into the earth, and then also that glow rising up from the heart to the neck and throat, face and crown of the head. Feeling yourself entirely held and embraced by the radiating light and energy of this one good point. And taking a full breath in and letting an intentional exhale, the breath passing through the body. You can gently open your eyes if they've been closed. And just consider for a moment, and if you are a journaler and you have some pen and paper, or you want to do a little reflection on your phone, if that's helpful for you, just think for a moment, what was this exercise like? Was it easy? Was it hard? Was it easy to identify that nikuda tova? What was the experience of staying with it? And did you notice over those few minutes the judging mind arising in any way? maybe in the way that Rabbi Nachman suggests we might say, oh, but that good point, it wasn't really good. When I held the door open for that person behind me, I really just wanted them to think I was so wonderful. It wasn't really pure. So where is it easy for you to find that goodness in yourself, and where does the challenge of judgment come up? If you're writing and journaling and you'd like to continue with that, by all means, go ahead. I'm going to turn us now to the next text in the sheet, and I'll put up, I'll share my screen. If you were in meditation a couple of weeks ago, you saw this or you heard it. Something I read recently that I found really deeply, deeply powerful. The first verse of Parshat Shoftim, Deuteronomy 16:18, says, gives us an instruction. Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol she'arecha. You shall appoint judges and officers at all your gates. What are these judges? Who are these officers? What's their role? The parasha goes on to explain a little bit more about what it means by judgment and officers, and what is this process and this system. And it's speaking of a society, speaking of a way to set up a society. But like everything in the Torah, we can also find a way to relate it to the work of our own heart. And there's a wonderful book, Good Noticing, which was a book that was put together to honor Rabbi Sheila Peltz-Weinberg, who's really enormous, amazing teacher of mindfulness. And this reflection comes from Rabbi Marley Gordon, who wrote on this parasha. The parsha begins, appoint shoftim, judges, and shotrim, officer guardians, not one without the other. The shotrim are the officer guardians who enforce limits on our judging. We engage our inner shotrim to bring us back from incomplete and therefore false judgments to the whole of this moment. We engage our inner shotrim to remind our inner shoftim to observe and absorb all the evidence of this moment, to experience without jumping to judgment. You shall place judges and officers b'chol she'arecha, at all your gates, the gates to our hearts, our motivations, and our fears, the gates to the other person in front of us at this moment, the gates to decisions, large and small. So how do you understand what Rabbi Gordon is offering us here? What is the relationship that she suggests between judgment and guardians? What is the role of judgment, of shoftim, of judgers? Again, in traditional practice, we say we want to be present without judgment. We are aware of our judging mind, and we want to quiet that. And here she's suggesting, I think based on how the Torah offers us these two roles in society and in our hearts, that there is perhaps a place for judgment, but it can only go, we can only allow it to go so far. And what I understand from this teaching is a very important word, a very important concept that I think sometimes gets missed. Because if we lean fully into the Rabbi Nachman perspective, which is so important as a foundation for our own inner work, and we lean into a full posture of acceptance, where is the space for teshuvah? Where is the space for any change? If we're saying, I'm just going to focus on the good, and it's all good, and I'm just going to see that good and just accept what is. And there's value to that, because the judging mind goes too far. It goes to an extreme. And here Rabbi Gordon is saying we need that judging mind sometimes. We actually need judgment, but it needs to be reined in. And I would call that discernment. That what we are doing in the process of teshuvah, and this is another way to bring these two approaches of the Rambam and Rabbi Nachman together, is that it's not either or. It's not that we have to live in this self-flagellation. I'm so terrible. Here's all the things I did wrong. Let me make the whole list, which, by the way, we do. We say it over and over again in our liturgy. Maybe we start to feel a little bit bad, really bad about ourselves. And that's ultimately not a healthy or useful posture, because if we stay only in that, as Rabbi Nachman says, we'll just stay in depression. We'll never be able to do anything. But there is something that arises for us when judgment arises. There is perhaps a kernel of truth in the judgment. And the process of bringing a compassionate lens to that judgment, to say, how can I look at what's arising with compassion, with guardianship in the language of this parasha? That is the work of discernment. To say, where do I want to do teshuvah? Where is my next step? What is the thing that I want to change? And so to learn from the judgment that the Rambam pushes us into, but to bring in a compassionate lens to say, not to get lost in the minimizing of ourselves. Barbara, yeah.
So it sounds to me that for me, discernment and judgment feel different. discernment feels like an understanding. It feels like truth and doesn't necessarily have to hold the harshness of my judgment. And if I can't see, if I don't look in truthfully to see what's going on, then I really will have no idea what my work is. And it's almost like a tzimtzum. It's a pulling back in order to, it feels more like a gvura, I guess, where I'm making space to see that truth without falling into a deep, dark pit.
Beautifully
like to-
said. Yes, yes, beautiful. We can't actually do the work of teshuvah without seeing where we do want to change, where we have done things that have hurt ourselves, hurt others, hurt our relationship with God. If you were watching services or you were at services this past week and you heard Roli speak about looking, how do we really, what is the work of this season? It is really looking with honesty, with real honesty at the places we don't necessarily want to look in our hearts, at the things we don't want to admit, even in our own minds. But if we stay there, if that's the only thing we do, if we stay in that realm of judging mind, there is no space for change. And if we are only in the space of compassion and self-acceptance, then where is the possibility to see the honesty, to look honestly at where our teshuvah journey needs to go? John.
Thank you, Shuli. I think one of the challenges, and this may be some of the differentiation between judgment and discernment, is it's very easy to start examining and getting lost in the story of what we're examining. And then starting to feel a certain way about the story, which we're inventing in our mind, which is different than what happened. And our memories are terrible anyway. And we may think that we emotionally remember things very clearly and vividly, but probably most of us have the experience of a significant other telling a story about something that we were at and we know they're entirely wrong. And that's not the way it happened. And I don't know why Orly always gets it wrong and I'm always right. And I'm sure we all have that same reaction, but we get lost in the story of the truth of our experience where it may not be the way it is. And that's one of the challenges. Are we reacting to what happened, or are we reacting to our version or the story that we create of what happened?
Yes. And this is what I love about Rabbi Gordon's offering, is that she's saying the judging is going to come and we have to bring that in to see the truth, because there's probably a truth in there. If we let it go, if we go all the way into the story and then we're reacting more to the story, then absolutely we're going to go farther away from the truth. We're going to get farther down the path of anger, of frustration, of hurt. But if we can find a tool, a spiritual tool, to drop the story and see the kernel of truth that the original judgment, that the original shofet has brought to us, then we can do our work of teshuvah. And I want to suggest that that tool that we bring in is the tool of compassion. That when judgment arises, we bring compassion in, not to say, oh no, I'm fine. It was okay what I did. I'm a good person. I yelled at, well, I'll just give a personal example. I yelled at my child. Okay, I'm just going to accept that that's where I was today. But I want to see that kernel of truth. That is the question of, why did I do that? And I don't want to be that kind of person in the world. I don't want to relate to my children in that way. So I want to look at that truth, and I do want to judge it in a sense, but I want to judge it compassionately, and that's discernment. That is saying, that's not getting lost in the story, as you said, John. That is saying, what's the truth here that I can learn from? And this happened because I am human. There's the compassion. I'm not going to let myself just go into that place of beating myself up and hating myself. I'm going to bring the compassion in so that I can actually learn from this moment of judgment. So rather than thinking of Din and Rachamim, judgment and compassion, as two opposite poles that we need to somehow bring in balance, I want to suggest that to do the work of Teshuvah, what we actually need to do is pay attention to when those moments of judgment arise, and to meet them both from that foundation of self-compassion that Rabbi Nachman sets for us, of knowing our inner goodness, and also with the compassion of saying, how can I look honestly at the truth of this moment so I can do the work that I need to do? And I think this concept is expressed very beautifully at the liturgy from the Yamim Noraim is very challenging. Most of the liturgy is kind of leaning in that judgment. I did this wrong, I did that wrong, and starting to go off in the story of everything that we did wrong. And I want to share an interpretation of a passage that we say at the end of the Amidah repeatedly on Yom Kippur. And in fact, the variation of this is part of our morning tefillot, part of the morning blessings. And it's a prayer that comes from the tractate, Babylonian Talmud tractate Brachot, page 17. After his prayer, Rava said the following: "My God, before I was created, I was worthless. And now that I have been created, it is as if I had not been created. I'm nothing," Rava seems to be saying. "I'm totally worthless. Before I was born, now that I'm born, I'm totally worthless. I'm dust in life. I'm all the more so in my death. I am a vessel filled with shame and humiliation. I'm only sinning. Please let me sin no more. Let me be cleansed of all your of all my wrongdoing." And Rava used to say this every day, and then Rav Hamnuna Zuti added it to the Yom Kippur liturgy. So this is a very challenging thing to read. This is like the Rambam to the extreme. I am only my wrongdoings. I am only all the pain that I have caused in the world. And so I'm worthless. And in this beautiful reimagination of what this passage is, teaching of Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook from Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, Soloveitchik cites this. I haven't found the original of Rav Kook, but I'll trust Rav Soloveitchik that he knew that this was a teaching of Rav Kook. Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook would explain the words, "My God, before I was created," in this way. My God, before I was created, I was not needed. I wasn't needed yet. Not that I was worthless before my creation, but I was not needed in those periods of time before I was alive. I would not have been able to fulfill my unique mission. And therefore you waited to create me until the generation arrived when it would be entirely impossible for me to enact the Torah of my unique purpose. Except to great sorrow, now that I have been created, right? What did Rava say? Now that I have been created, it is as if I was not created, I'm still worthless? No, Rav Kook says. If during the time of my existence, I do not take advantage of the opportunity that was given to me and embody even a part of my unique purpose, it will be as I have never lived. So Rav Kook here rereads, reimagines this very heavy, harsh judgment of this prayer, which we're going to see on Yom Kippur over and over again, not as a statement of self-effacement, but actually a statement of our unique value in the world. And if we don't live into our unique mission, the purpose for which we were created, then it's if we were not created. And I want to understand this. I do understand this. And so I bring it here tonight and offer it to you as a teaching of compassion. That to transform one's understanding of oneself from something worthless that never should have been created into something that has a unique mission and purpose in life, we bring in compassion and self-love to do that. That's a tightrope that we're walking this time of year. It's a very thin line. But that is the work, to not get discouraged or drown in the judgment and not get complacent in the self-acceptance, but to bring them both together, to discern where our work is, to discern what our unique mission is, and then to do the work of Teshuvah, to live that out. So I wish for all of us in this season, as we are journeying and tiptoeing on this tightrope, that we have both the ability to notice where we see the things we want to change and be able to connect enough with our nikudat tova, with our goodness, with our good point, to see those things through the lens of discernment and as a step toward living out our unique mission and purpose in the world. I wish you all a Shana Tova. Thank you so much for being here this evening. And I look forward to seeing many of you on the next step of the journey. Laila Tov, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you, Rabbi Shuli.
Thank you, Rabbi. It was great.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.